Hi and welcome to Family Sociology, and we're going to start with Chapter 1, but I'm going to start with something that's not in your textbook, but I think it's an important beginning piece to understand about sociology, but also by extension, family sociology. So the topic here is looking at just a little introductory piece about what is sociology and by extension what is family sociology. But a very important part, it'll help you with your assignment, but it's what's called sociological imagination. And this is something that was introduced early in sociology to try to get a perspective about how to see the world around us, rather than from our own perspective, but also from a bigger perspective. And so that's what the first part of this. And then I'm going to introduce some basics about family sociology and looking at how it's studied, and then look at the research formulas, or at least basis of it. Week 2, or the second part of this video, that'll be a separate video, we'll be looking at the theories. Okay, so let's get started. So what is sociology, or what is, as a science is it? And when we look at sociology, what's really important about it is, by definition, as you can see here, a systematic study of human society and social interactions. Now there's a lot to be said there. One, it's a study, it's a scientific study, so it follows the scientific method like a lot of other researchologies. Biology, anthropology, sociology, psychology, all follow the scientific method and have a specific manner in which they do it. And so it makes it less likely for bias, much more diligent in ensuring that the same thing is being done each and every time so it can be replicated. And so it's a scientific study. And we're looking at trying to understand in terms of why would we study this is, we look at the systematic study, we look at the individual within a society. Does the individual affect the overall society? And we also look at society. How does society affect the individual? So it's this relationship between individual and society that sociology, and thereby extension, family sociology looks at. So in family, we're going to look at families. We'll look at the individuals in the family and how they interact with one another. Do individuals affect the family? Does family affect the individuals? And then by extension, does family impact society? And does society impact family? And so we're going to look at the sort of the consequences of this difference between individual and society, or family and society, and look at the differences. How is it that some families are more advantaged than others, or how is it some individuals are more advantaged or more disadvantaged than others? And so why do we study this topic of sociology, or by extension family sociology, is to understand the interdependence and the complexities of social life. It's not just the same for everybody. And so this is where sociological imagination will come in, is how is it different? What makes it so complex? What are the elements that affect all of us, sometimes differently? And we're going to, one of the reasons why we study is to participate in the process of public, social, economic, and cultural studies. Now, for example, and I'll mention that I think in the assignment, is previous government under Harris had taken what was the Stats Canada census and made it from a long form and put it into a short form, meaning it was gathering less information. That information from census is what compiles a lot of the foundation or the basis for social policies, public policies, economic policies, and cultural policies. Under the new Liberal government, they've chosen to expand that census back to the long form, which will generate more data, more information that will enable us to be able to make better decisions about, if you will, or more informed decisions about public, social, economic, and cultural policies. And then the third reason that we study sociology, and by extension family sociology, is to understand what the differences are and the possible explanation for these differences. So not all family is the same, not just in terms of family types, single-parented by mom, single-parented by dad, nuclear, blended, adoptive, but also in terms of lower income, middle income, higher income. And so why these differences, and what might be some of the explanations to understand why these differences exist? And so that's a large part of what it is that sociology does, and by extension, family sociology. So now let's look at the sociological imagination. Now, C. Wright Mills, he's a sociologist, and he spent a fair bit of his career looking at this sort of conception of the sociological imagination, this ability to see the relationships between the individual and their experience and that of the larger society. And that sometimes we would see things strictly from our own perspective and see that life maybe seems unfair. Whereas there might be social or society issues that impinge on the individual and also cause some of their experience. And so he looked at the society and individual in two different ways. He described them in two different dimensions, if you will. He had the personal troubles and the public troubles. So if you look at homelessness, unemployment, divorce, family violence, you could see them both as having individual responsibilities, if you will, and public. The individual would be depression or anger because of a loss of a job, maybe because of their own doing, and taking out onto the family some of the violence that might occur or the divorce that could occur. And this is all personal issues, where on the larger side, the public issue would be, well, how does someone become homeless? What if, as in 2008, a lot of people lost their jobs because of the economic crash in the automotive industry. And was that their fault individually, or was that a public issue, a societal issue? And did that maybe affect the same kind of impact on family life as does someone losing the job because they're inadequate? And so it looks at these two different issues. So personal troubles of the individual and the network of support that they have and these people whom they associate with on a regular basis, that's the personal trouble. Whereas the public trouble, this is when a person commits, this is beyond your own personal experience. It's not based on what you do in your own home, but it's caused by problems originating at the social level. And the social level could be, economic policy changes, government policy changes, educational policy changes that all could affect you as an individual or you and your family. And this becomes very important so that when we look at different social issues as it relates to individuals or families, it's important to look beyond our own perspective about why we think that happens and start to look at both what might be the personal problems that exist within a family and what might be some of the societal issues that impinge on a family. And those two perspectives is what is the sociological imagination. Now what we're going to look at is just what is a family. And we probably all think we know what is a family, but it changes over time. Family, what it was 100 years ago, 1,000 years ago, isn't the same of what a family is today. And we could argue over the last 30 to 40 years we've gone through a fairly dramatic shift of what is a family. So it changes over time, it changes in places. What a family is in this country isn't necessarily the same of what a family is in a different country. We can experience this in our own time, and we can see this shift and change occur because of the use of media, for example. Now, when we think of one of the definitions in sociology is called a household. And by definition, this is people who occupy the same dwelling. One or more families could be involved in this. A single person or a group of related or unrelated people, could be a grandmother, could be apartment roommates, brothers and sisters. And there's been a long history in our time where this was the definition of family. Now also in our culture, and in many others, the majority of families are what we would call monogamous. And this is where you marry one other person at a time. Now in some cultures, polygamy is accepted, or is it even the norm? And this is where one person is married to several others of the opposite sex. Now we have other forms of family. Communal living is an example of another form of family. This is a group of families, often with a shared belief, shared resources. They share their money, clothing, food, And work is done to benefit the overall collective of the whole community. The community takes precedent over the family. Now, this isn't unique, but it's also not typically what we would describe, at least in Canadian society and by family sociological perspectives, what is a family. So if we further explore what is a family, the definitions of a family is and how it functions in society have changed over time and place. It's different for where we are, what period of time we're in, and between cultures. A variety of legal definitions emerge, but there's no fixed legal definition, as a definition often changes. There's not even a real defined definition of family. By the legal standards, government regulations determine family for such things as medical or family benefits. So you can't describe your friend as your family and then give them your family benefits or medical experiences. And so there is a legal definition for those purposes. Common law spouses, single parents with one children, the same-sex couples, are all considered families under various laws and legal definitions. Stats Canada creates what they call a census family. Correctional Services Canada, Air Canada, the Vanier Institute for Families, Children's Aid Society of Toronto, they all have different definitions of family. Now, at a different level, other than legal, there's the social definition. And this is where various groups, including religious organizations, churches, ethnic groups, they have definitions of family that are different. Different for hospital visitations, different in terms of what's accepted in terms of family, who's a part of your family. That in spite of these differences, there's two basic types of families that emerge. There's the nuclear family, and this is a family consisting of a husband and wife and their children. It's often called the standard North American family. It forms the basis for what advocates call traditional family values. Now, there's two ways in which we may be a part of a family. There's either the family of orientation. This is the family that we were born into and raised by. So your mom and dad, that's you being a part of their family, and so that's your family of orientation. But then when you grow older and have children of your own and start your own family, that's called a family of procreation. Now, the other form of family, there's two forms, extended. The other form is extended, and this is nuclear plus other relatives. In some cultures and some people you may know live in extended families. Now, the third sort of variation of definition is called personal definitions of family. And in some cases, close friends are considered family members. Maybe you've had somebody who's lived at your house a lot and even sleeps over and may spend extended periods of time. You might treat them as a family member, but they aren't by blood your family member. In some cases, in terms of conflict, like a divorce, a family member not being considered as belonging, even though he or she may be blood members. Now, the last is what's called an intentional family. And this is, again, not a legal definition, but this is a family whose members are not related by blood or marriage, but they call themselves a family. They share residence and a common lifestyle. Decisions to join one often arise out of human need for companionship or an emotional connection that comes from shared experiences. Now, how does society influence families? Families don't exist in isolation. They're part of a larger, vaster social network. Your family isn't just a family in and of itself. It's connected to other families. It's connected to other people in your neighborhood. And by that relation and that extension, you're connected socially to a variety of other families. So a family doesn't emerge out of isolation. Now, your family could be quite a bit different from your neighbor's family, but it doesn't mean you haven't had some overlap and some influence on one another. Family members are part of our larger society through membership and participations in neighborhoods and communities. You don't share all things with all people in your community. However, by virtue of being in the same area of the city, some of the experiences that you have are similar, and so your families are therefore affected by that. Garbage pickup, community events, children playing in the neighborhood, all become part of that. Now you've got schools, be in your community, work, religious organizations, social or recreational groups. Society provides expectations, if you will, about how families should be behaving. Because of where we live in Canada, or because we live in Canada, we are influenced by Canadian culture as to how our families are formed. We choose our families. We choose who we marry. We choose whether or not to have children, when to have children. In different cultures, that's not a choice that everybody has. So our culture helps define how our family is to behave. Now that's changing some, because traditionally it used to be the men led the family and women were looking after the children. And we see in today's world that that's altered somewhat, and we see more shared responsibilities occurring. So the family is changing, and some of that is from society, and some of that is from individuals themselves and how they choose to form their family. Now, family members are supposed to socialize your children and look after each other physically and emotionally and not inflict harm. That's one of the conditions that we sort of assume about what a family is in Canada. Now, not everyone is able to fulfill their family obligations in terms of the expectations, and so there are social networks that help support people, and sometimes the result is that of more isolation. Now there's two ways that we're going to look at in the next video on theories, that we're going to look at how does sociology look at family. Well, there's the macro and the micro. The macro sort of is a big picture view. Looks at the big picture, studies how societal values affect the family. So how does, for families in Owen Sound or in Barrie or in London, how does bringing more refugees into those cities affect families? And some embrace and welcome and be supportive, and others are nervous and apprehensive. And so you see this shift about how do we respond. Well, the macro view is looking at this bigger picture, not at the individual families, but looking at these social influences and what they do to families. Now, the micro, on the other hand, this focuses on individuals in small groups, emphasizes the relationships between individuals in these families. So it would look at the relationship between mom and dad and children, mom and son and daughter, dad and son and daughter. And so to look at those things a little more specifically. And we're going to look at both theories with both focuses. Now, when we look at how does sociology become a part of research, that scientific study, it uses two forms of research, and one is called quantitative. Now, quantitative, in terms of quantity, you can remind yourself, is about numbers. Data is represented in numbers and are analyzed using statistical computations. Now, if you go to Stats Canada, like what you're seeing on the screen right now, you're seeing a table that looks at numbers. Doesn't tell you anything about those 9.369 million people in terms of total families. It doesn't tell you any detail, but it does tell you how many of these families there are. That's quantitative. Surveys, experiments can be done. Now, quantitative is about a lot of stuff, but not much details about individuals. Now, it could be considered like having a big net with lots of holes, and as you drag it through the water, you're picking up everything. And then later, researchers and theorists will start to interpret that data. Once researchers have gathered data, often perform statistical analysis, engage in correlational research and cross-sectional research, cohort effect studies, and longitudinal research to make sense of this information. But it's using lots of data and sort of narrowing it down to numbers in a sense. Now, alternatively, research can be done using qualitative. Now, qualitative doesn't mean you have a lot of information about a lot of people, but it means you have a lot of information about a few people. And so instead of counting just numbers, they seek to understand social conditions from the people being studied. Direct information, so they'll do face-to-face interviews, telephone surveys, internet questionnaires, surveys by mail. Maybe you've been stopped in the mall and been asked to fill out a survey. Maybe you've had to do one, you've agreed to do one over the phone. That's qualitative. It's more focused. It's more direct information from people being observed. It can be direct verbal descriptions based on the in-depth interviews and observations. And in both, there is a premium on being specific and clear. So it's important that when answering questions, you be as clear and specific as you can be. But that's the two type of information that's being gathered for research. It's qualitative and quantitative. Well, that's finishing up the video that we have for week 1. I hope you found it useful and helpful. And you'll see also posted in week 1 the second video, which then looks at theories. Thank you. Bye now.